I've been to LA to record a project in which real surfers play surf music. Silly but fun. Now I get excited mostly about guitar equipment. I played through an effect called the tell ray. It floats the electric signal through a swirling cylinder of toxic chemicals. It was outlawed in the 60s. I love it. Most of what I've been associated with is a kind of anti-rock, which instead of the power chord emphasizes a certain kind of thinness and frailty. I had more the feeling like the world was becoming a big pile of garbage, and whenever I would express myself lyrically, even if it was fun, I was adding to a great big mountain of garbage. And so this made me, like, eventually want to do other things like quotation and using what was already there in some way, or else just make noise.
The tricky thing about the downtown new music in New York has always been whether it's sort of a club music or is it a concert music anyway. It's the same problem that jazz has had since 1945, since bebop too. I mean, what is this stuff anyway? Is it a kind of art music, or is it kind of club music, or is it entertainment? I mean, and I think that when those kind of questions are less clear, that's also pretty exciting, even though it can be very frustrating too.
problem with post-punk nowadays is that it's easy to hear the screaming, but harder to identify the wound.
There was a period where he had gotten really turned on to Ornette and Primetime Band, Jamaaladeen, Calvin Weston, and the way that they improvise together collectively, but with a sense of groove, that comes more in some ways from funk or from African music than it does from jazz. And Mark was obsessed for a while with Primetime.
I think that what a music is not intrinsic in the music itself. But I think that a particular music can be part of more than one history. And I think that there is a certain trend in jazz, a trend that goes from Thelonious, it begins, well, I don't know where it begins, but a trend that I noticed starting with Thelonious Monk and Ornette Coleman's Primetime Band and Albert Ayler. See, I would write these in as these can also be written into the history of rock. I have tried to imagine a history of rock that includes these musicians.
Just back from LA today, project with Sam Phillips, T-Bone Burnett. One of the most fun parts was renting a car and driving around LA, listening to violent hip-hop. They play censored versions on the radio now, and the rappers use the empty spaces brilliantly. Some pieces are almost nothing but holes, authenticity established by what's missing.
People are always asking me on tour, like, Marc Ribot, il est français, or il est de Louisiane, and it's like, there's something in that name is very enticing to a lot of people.
My family tells its stories in a strange way. You can never tell what's true and what's made up, and everything gets blended in with things that have been read and things that are remembered. So, but anyways, according to family folklore, my great-grandfather was a failed rabbi from a small town near Minsk in Belarus, in White Russia. I was born in Newark, about a mile from here, from this train station, in Newark Beth Israel Hospital. And my father continues to work at Newark Beth Israel Hospital. It's one of the few that stayed in Newark after the riots, at the time that the majority of white people left, and most of the Jewish community here also left and went to the suburbs. My family, when I was young, moved to Orange, which is now another mostly black city on the edges of Newark, and then eventually to sort of middle-class suburb of South Orange.
Grafting my story onto American pastoral? Are we creating another myth of the white Negro? In 1979, I worked with Jack McDuff, and not for long, but for 4 or 5 months, and we used to come out here and play in the Key Club. I mean, it's not there anymore, but Charlie Parker played there. It was a scene of primarily organ jazz
And it also was in these entirely black clubs here in Newark. And we would be crowded onto this little island with the quartet and the PA system, and it was fantastic. There was a big music tradition, and then across the street was Sparky J's. I remember we were playing at the Key Club, and Charles Erland, who also died recently, was playing at Sparky J's, and Jimmy McGriff would play there, and Houston Person and Etta Jones also played those clubs, and it was called, by musicians anyways, it was called the Chitlin Circuit. But this was a circuit of jazz that went all over the United States through black communities. It was like most of the fans were working class black people who were really jazz fans and really could tell the difference between when it was happening and wasn't. It was the only audience that I've ever played for in my life that applauded for restraint. I mean, most white audiences seem to mistake the guitar for a trumpet, and they think it's really something that's fantastic if you play a really high note on guitar, as if it's any more difficult than playing a low note. But the audiences in those clubs really were hip.
Right during this period when I came to New York, I became involved in a group called the Real Tones, Brenda and the Real Tones originally. We were the house band at a club called Tramps in around 81 and 82. And we backed up a lot of Stax Volt artists and early soul artists. We backed up Solomon Burke, we did a record called Soul Alive with Solomon Burke, which was actually the first record I recorded. I was very proud because Robert Christgau of the Village Voice reviewed it that year, not knowing who the band was, as an example of a completely black aesthetic. We backed Carla Thomas, Rufus Thomas, Syl Johnson, and it was really a great experience at that time. And then later I did a short tour of Europe with Wilson Pickett. In fact, it ended in a riot here in Paris, if I remember correctly. I've played in a lot of Anthony's pieces. I think he's one of the main composers for Downtown. He played in Rootless Cosmopolitans, my first band. It was he who originally gave me a copy of Arsenio Rodriguez's music. I met E.J. Rodriguez. He was playing percussion in the Lounge Lizards, I think beginning in around 85, so we toured together and spent a lot of time on the road. Roberto is the only original, actual Cuban in the band. He's grew up partly in Cuba and partly in Miami. He's the son of a Cuban song trumpet player. And Brad played for a while in my first band, Rootless Cosmopolitans. So we have a long history, and they're great players.
November 10th, 2001. I played 3 of the benefit shows at Tonic for the Red Cross, including one the Sunday after the attack. I was able to reach the club on my bicycle on Saturday night. It was still closed to cars. The necessity was to, 1, raise money for relief, 2, keep the club from folding, 3, affirm some kind of sense of continued community while everyone seemed to be losing their minds. Responding to your question, how do you live, think, and play music in the aftermath of this disaster? Feeling pointless is nothing new. What was different in the immediate aftermath was that it was somehow urgent to find a musical response, yet almost impossible because the language and reference had almost all changed. So everything felt like failure, but somehow necessary failure. If poetry is possible after Auschwitz, then it should be possible after September 11th, but I'm not sure it has been written yet. I feel sad at times like everyone. People are edgy on subways, bridges, airports, obsessive talking about it, flags everywhere, slowly getting back to, quote, normal, unquote. Forced to consider whether my promise to take care of Clara necessitates leaving the city. Don't think so, but I did buy duct tape to seal windows and purified water, just like the 50s, eh? cases of the solo records, it's the songs that are what's being dug up, some kind of decomposed state. Of course, things that you dig up, they've been down there a while, they've altered, they've rotted, they were damaged in being buried and they're damaged in being dug up. And that's the way it is. I played trumpet when I was 9 or 10 or something, and guitar starting when I was 11. As a result of Bob Dylan, the Rolling Stones, and braces. You know, braces, these things on your teeth, it made it impossible for me to play trumpet. It's unfortunate I got my braces soon after I heard my first Miles Davis records. Things could have gone very differently. I studied from the time I was 11 till I was 14 with Franz. I started to study with him again when I was in my 30s. And the result of that was Disc de Crépuscule recording. Marc Ribot plays the works for solo guitar of Franz Casillas. When you learn on classical guitar, it's a way of working where you learn to take a big problem and break it down into 1,000 tiny problems and solve them one at a time. Classical guitar pieces are physical freaks of nature. I mean, people shouldn't be able to do that kind of thing. And they do it by breaking it down into tiny steps and learning them very slowly. So it's a certain approach, and that you can use elsewhere. Coney Island.
Bare skin is my wrinkled sack when hot Apollo humps my back. When Jack Frost grabs me in these rags, I wrap my legs with burlap bags.
March 25th, 1997. I heard Patti Smith sing So Lonesome I Could Cry by Hank Williams at Allen Ginsberg's memorial last week. Clara heard it too. I wonder if Clara will care when she's older. Maybe. I moved here in 1978. I only had one goal, well, two goals. One was to make enough money to pay my rent, and the other was to sound like Grant Green. Around that time, actually, things started to happen that I could relate with, you know, but it had more to do with no-wave stuff. A lot of it came from that scene, like hearing some of Robert Quine's solos with Richard Hell and the Voidoids, and hearing Arto Lindsay play with DNA, later with the Lounge Lizards, and hearing certain Fred Frith records. It was still a very exciting time in New York, and it was a very exciting time for me personally. I was hearing a lot of stuff that was going to become what I did for the next 15, 17 years.
I mean, my situation is different than Mark. Mark could have been, you know, Mark deliberately went a different direction, you know. He went away from what he had. But I just kind of did what I wanted to do. It wasn't away from anything, you know.
At the time, the Lower East Side was a different place than it was now. It was very poor and working class. It was in the middle of this sort of drug crisis that a number of my friends were sort of helping with.
A lot of people died. I mean, in this neighborhood, AIDS seemed to alter the general mood. And then of the people who didn't die and the people who didn't leave, a lot of people suffered or underwent a different kind of death or transformation. Record deals came and went, boyfriends and girlfriends came and went, but I don't know, eventually a lot of people focused more on craft and
That's why I don't give guitar lessons, because, you know, everybody wants to know, thinks it's so important what notes you play, you know? People spend years learning what notes to play, and that matters like 5%, and what matters 95% is understanding the project, really, understanding it semiotically.
John is a friend of mine, and we've worked together since about 89 maybe, or 90. He's a real composer. When he wrote for guitar, he knew more about extended techniques for guitar than I did. I mean, he wrote a lot of things that were impossible to do. That doesn't seem to bother him, you know, but he does that intentionally too.
Mark is a conceptualist, but I would say John is a conceptualist first, player second, and I would say, and I don't think it's insulting to say, I would say Mark is a player first, conceptualist second. In Mark's playing is tons of conception. But what I mean is, Mark conceptualizes through his playing. And John uses his playing as a vehicle for his conception. So we were all kind of very in the radical Jewish scene. You know, it was like it just was one of those things that it just kind of evolved. And Mark started Shrek around that time, too. Schrecklich, you know, Schreck, having to do with terror or fear, horror, you know. And then we had a kind of very dynamic relation to discussing what this Jewish thing meant.
I killed your God. Listen, you say after a couple of drinks. Why do you always leave it to your retarded brothers in the KKK? Say the dirty word. I know you're thinking.
December 6th, 1995. Traveling is my recovery from being here. Soon I'll feel claustrophobic in the entire world. Real free improvisation, it took me a while to get into that. Once I did, some funny things started to come out. When you really try to play with no preconceptions, of course, that's impossible. So what you find are your deep preconceptions. When you play with no history, what you try to play, you find your deep history. The tactics we used to do it were starting from silence, but also mostly in our case, starting from noise. Noise would become a kind of blank surface onto which you could start to hear your own projections, so the shape would emerge from the noise. And that shape would take form. It was a shape that would come from some kind of subconscious or collective subconscious or unconscious place. And as I started doing more of this, what I started to hear sometimes was a kind of weird Jewish music, or something that sounded like this really archaic and ugly, not klezmer particularly, but weird chunks of Jewish music started to sort of float to the surface. It was kind of shocking to me. When I started to look at the reasons why this stuff might have been repressed material, I was influenced by what was going on around me, like the black struggle and the gay struggle and the women's struggle, all had sort of critiques of the way dominant cultures repressed other cultures. I was influenced by that, you know. I'm gonna return to point zero and improvise again and make noise again until something crawls out of it. That's all I know how to do. I'm not going to pretend that this is a normal night or this is a normal concert. I'm not going to pretend that it's normal when my government for the third night in a row is bombarding another country completely against the will of, well, more or less the entire world.
Américaine contre la guerre! Américaine contre la guerre!
Hey, is there McDonald's here? Maybe we could go burn it down in Poe. George Bush's family was not cowboys. They were bankers in Connecticut who got kicked out of banking for laundering money for the Nazis. I wish I was joking. But real cowboys had other sentiments. Oh, bury me not on Lone Prairie. These words came low and mournfully. From the pallid lips of a youth who lay on his dying bed at the end of the day. It mattered not, I've oft been told, where the body lies when the heart grows cold. Grand, oh grand, this wish to me. Bury me now on the Lone Prairie. Oh, bury me not. And his voice failed there, but we paid no heed to his dying prayer. In a narrow grave, just 6 by 3, we buried him out on the Lone